Hi, and thanks for joining me for this post tonight. If you keep doing something and getting results which are less than favorable, it's a pretty strong indicator that you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve. So, tonight I'm going to talk about how to understand the world we're in so we can start taking steps or actions which are going to give us the kind of results we'd like to see. First of all, if you'd like to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button so that I can bring you more of my posts on my YouTube channel. So tonight I'm going to talk about how to understand the world we're in. Start off this way. If you've got the wrong template for the way the world runs, you'll never understand what's going on. There seems to be a parallel line, two parallel lines in operation here. There's the parallel lines. One of the parallel lines is the lines along which we, ordinary people, operate. And then there is another line, is a level at which those who actually run our affairs run on. And of course, parallel lines never meet. They meet at infinity, meaning they never meet at all. So the template that you and I are encouraged to hold of the world is that of the nation state. So we're thinking in terms of, say, in Europe, we're talking France, the United Kingdom, we're talking Germany, Norway, Sweden, Spain, etc., etc. In the Far East, we got Russia, we got the Ukraine, we got other countries, we've got China. In Asia, we've got India. Then the Far East, we've got Japan. Further down, we have Africa with 55 different countries. And over further to the west again, we have the United States and the states in Southern America. So it looks as if we live in a pretty diverse world. And we are all encouraged to act according to our national interests. And yet, the truth is, the world is run on a global basis. Through the activities of organizations like the World Economic Forum and other kind of collateral organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, and so on, you can see that there is another tier on which world affairs are being run. And the best indicator for that is the way in which the world's truly powerful, if you like, rich elites operate in. Take a person like Bill Gates, who was born in Seattle, Washington. Do you really think that Bill Gates sees himself as an American citizen? Jeff Bezos, another American. Elon Musk, another American of South African origin. Ma, he's Chinese. You know, do you really think that these people see themselves as an American, as a South African, as another American, or as a Chinese person? No, they don't, because their business is run on a global basis. All their interests are run on a global basis. And actually, their business is done not with, but through the governments of the individual nation states, which is the level at which we come in. And so, while it looks as if we're voting our individual governments into power and so on and so forth, it just doesn't work for these global interests to have you and I, as ordinary voters, determine the future of their businesses. And so they put enormous influence on the agents that we vote for, such that in the end, it's very difficult to work out who is really talking, whether it's the global interests who are talking or the officials that you and I at the nation state level vote for to run our affairs. Now, Of course, the first thing people will say when you talk about the world in this way, the world of globalized interests, is conspiracy theory. Well, I'd just like to examine that for a second, if I may. The truth is, to run a really powerful conspiracy theory to the point of propaganda and get people to be influenced by it, you need two things. You need near total control of the media, and you also need the ability to create a worldwide vision. There may be a third element which is useful, is that you need institutions which are also global to put those visions into practice. Little individuals don't have that kind of power. The only people who have that kind of power are the global elites. And so it is that the moment somebody starts kind of unraveling the spider's web of what's going on a global basis, it is the media that calls this analysis a conspiracy theory. And yet, the media is controlled largely by these very powerful global elites. Indeed, at the very top end of the media, you can't put a cigarette paper between the global elites and the media, whether it's Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and all the national so-called quality media that you and I have been raised to look up to and respect as the promoters of truth. And so it is that being controlled by masters way above yours and my pay grade, people are constantly fighting and bickering with each other. And of course, the most important thing about people fighting and bickering with each other is the single output that they weaken themselves. So as long as people are so divided, with one nation rising up against another, with one interest competing against another, they are remarkably easy to vanquish. I'm going to go down another route now. There is the route of the nation state. There is another global route of enormous importance, which is also ignored, almost completely, totally, utterly ignored, or is paid lip service to, which is that of race. The philosophy of race has been created such that within genus Homo sapiens, we have a hierarchy of the value and worth of different races. This situation, unjust as it is absolutely designed and perfect for human beings to be at constant loggerheads. Racism is one thing. Religious phobia is another thing. There are many other forms of discrimination. And all you have to do is to first of all create the problem, then fan the flames of it, and people will be at each other's throats on a constant basis. Now, what is curious is that everybody is muted in their telling of this self-evident truth that I am talking about here, because the moment they say that these conflicts are created by design, somebody will scream conspiracy theory. And the people who scream conspiracy theory are the very people who are the only ones with the authority, the power, the influence, and the heft to create the conflicts that I'm talking about. So, what's the solution to this? Of course, I could go on for ages, but I don't want to bore you. What I've laid out is quite self-evident. The solution for this is for us to find another basis for evaluating how we work, or administering how we work, the basis for it. Right now, the basis for how we work is, first of all, economic power. Might makes right, despite everything you and I studied in philosophy, in political economy, in political philosophy, and so on and so forth, about democracy and so on and so forth. Might, money, is what calls the shots. Following from money, might makes right, because money buys you arms and weapons. Money also buys you arms, weapons, and technology. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that once this bandwagon is rolling, it's very, very, very difficult to 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 halt. There is another alternative. And that alternative is to recognize the one thing that is constantly swept under the carpet. That is respect for humanity. Look, on the continent of Africa, there are between 1.3 and 1.4 billion, that's with a B for boy, people, okay? Across Europe, there are maybe 740 million people. So roughly, I mean, there are double the number of people in Africa alone to the people in Europe. I'm not adding the people of African origin who are in Southern America, in Brazil. Many people don't realize that actually Brazil is a majority people of African origin country. You would know it by who controls the power, because most of them were shipped there, obviously, as slaves. So the only solution to this is to change the basis for making decisions back to the idea of the worth and dignity of human life. Not the amount of money you got in the bank, not the amount of guns you've got in your arsenals, not the amount of technology you can deploy to back up your needs. And the truth is, we all have to live in coalition with each other. 30% of the world's most precious resources are in Africa, one continent. 30% of them are in that place. The truth is, Europe, North America, Canada, Australia, Japan, China, and Russia, they could not sustain their standard of living. And thus, depending on where you're from, your standard of living couldn't be sustained without doing trade of one kind or another with Africa. And if the basis of that trade is mutual respect, we can have a formula where we don't have to be at each other's throats all the time and lying about what we do in foreign countries. So there we are. The template we got for understanding the world is completely false. We are encouraged, you and I, as citizens of the world, to look at the world in a way in which the world certainly doesn't behave. The world behaves according to the dictates of the global interests that run it. And those global interests that run it justify their authority by the amount of money, tech, and military might that they have. Then they pass the solutions onto the international organizations which they have created. Right now, we're running through the so-called COVID pandemic. And so, of course, the World Bank is incredibly important. Last thing I'll say is this. If anybody were to be so misguided as to think that they prefer that status quo to one in which the individual human being has respect, should think again. Because when it comes time, as far as the global interests are concerned, they only deal with numbers of people. Now, even if they are adversely impacting those who look like me or other ethnic or of other ethnic origin first, they'll reach the people in Europe and North America, sure enough. And it's been proven. The First World War happened, Second World War happened. Second World War, between 60 and 80 million people were just wiped away from the face of this earth. Africans were involved, Asians were involved in the war as well, for sure. But the vast majority of people who died were from Europe and Russia. So this is just to let you know that if you think you're going to keep your mouth kind of muted, your voice muted, and let this thing play out because you perceive yourself to have certain ethnic privileges, that would be the biggest mistake. That'll rebound and come back and bite you so hard. Right now, the world is at a crossroads. This is about whether or not we choose to respect the dignity of the individual human life, or we give up our sovereignty to global interests who absolutely do not give. They don't give a hoot, frankly, for the life of the individual human being. And they will say anything they need to say to make themselves look like saviors, when in actual fact they're behaving in ways which are predatory to the extent that I don't believe humanity has seen in the history of the world. Thanks very much for joining me.